Okay, thank you everyone for joining our presentation today. My name's Brenda Connolly and I'm a clinical psychologist and the clinical lead for our new and official NCIC Staff Health and Wellbeing Service that officially launched on the 1st of June. And today I'm going to be presenting with my good colleague, Dr. Louise Harrold, who's a clinical psychologist from the Familiar Faces Service and the Physical Health Psychology Service. And we're going to be talking about team time. Louise is going to be focusing on that, but we're also going to be talking more generally about staff wellbeing and why it's everybody's business, okay? So, this is my first time sharing a screen using Teams, so bear with me. Bear with me. Okay. It's still full screen, Louise? Yeah. Okay, excellent. So really the aims of today's presentation are to firstly set the context of why staff wellbeing is important, briefly looking at the difficulties pre-COVID before considering the psychological trauma of the pandemic on our staff, and we'll talk a bit more about that later. I'll then provide an overview of a framework really for supporting the recovery process, in particular talking to you about the importance of embedding a compassionate focused psychological model so that we understand what I term the why of the what. So there's lots of what to do, but actually why are we doing that? And we know that if we're able to do that, it's likely to be more acceptable to people, more sustainable, more understandable, and hopefully more effective. We'll then briefly introduce the new NCIC Staff Health and Wellbeing Service, which we are basing on the frameworks that we're discussing. And then, as I said earlier, the presentation will end with my colleague Louise presenting an example of an intervention that we've been using over the past year to support staff called Team Time. And then we'll end with questions and comments. So as we all know, the NHS is world renowned for being at the forefront of patient care and cutting edge technology. And in a survey commissioned to mark its 70th anniversary, more than 2/3 of respondents stated that the NHS is Britain's greatest ever achievement. Okay, but what makes the NHS and the reputation it has is the 1.3 million staff who are at the very core of the NHS, and our staff are our most precious asset. So we know our staff are highly skilled and motivated across all levels of the organisation. They have great wisdom, experience and profound values of compassion. And the NHS achieves extraordinary things for patients, but safety, health and well-being matter just as much for our people as they do for our patients. If we don't look after ourselves and each other, we cannot deliver safe, high quality care. And it's encouraging that both the NHS long-term plan and the NHS people plan have well-being, staff well-being as one of its key objectives, with the overall aim of making the NHS the best place to work. So the objective is based on the compelling evidence that the more engaged our people, the more effective and productive they are, and more importantly, most importantly, the higher the quality of care that they can deliver to patients. And I think the keynote speaker, whose name escapes me, Paul, earlier really demonstrated the science behind that in his talk. Okay. So before considering the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on our staff's well-being, it is important to consider how our staff are doing pre-COVID. This is important as the amount of stress a person is experiencing at any one time can impact on their ability to cope with further stress and also increase their chances of developing a mental health difficulty. Okay. So just going to look very quickly, you may already be aware of this, but the stress vulnerability model of mental health can explain this process really well. So everybody, if they have enough stress in their lives, would experience some kind of psychological difficulty, even if their vulnerability is low. So experiencing traumas at home or at work can be one of the many things that increase our vulnerability to problems. This could place us further along the vulnerability line than you normally might be, so it takes less stress before starting to experience difficult psychological reactions like anxiety, low mood or panic. As well as this, remember that reactions themselves are stressful, so it's a bit of a double whammy. Recovery involves being aware of your stress levels and your vulnerability and acting to stay below the line so that you can build up your resilience, your mental strength. So using this model to think about what staff wellbeing was like pre-COVID allows us to better understand the impact of the pandemic on our staff and the possible different reactions and ways of coping or not coping. What we do know is that pre-COVID, nationally there were high levels of staff turnover with large numbers of nurses, midwives, and medical staff leaving every month. 1 in 11 staff leave the NHS entirely every year. There were chronically high levels of sickness absence and presenteeism. Sickness absence in the NHS ran about 2.3% points higher than the rest of the economy. 1 in 11 staff, as I said earlier, left the NHS entirely. Most NHS organisations struggled in recruiting staff. I think 1 in 11 NHS posts are vacant. And 50% more NHS staff reported debilitating levels of work stress compared to the working population. There were reports of higher levels of bullying, harassment and discrimination. And the latest NHS staff survey reinforces this understanding. So fundamentally, before the pandemic, all of the above was a crisis that threatened the ability of the service to deliver safe, high-quality care for the people in our communities. So therefore, the data tells us that pre-COVID, many staff were already close to or above the threshold for experiencing mental health difficulties. Then comes along the COVID-19 pandemic, which in and of itself was enough to push most staff over the threshold, but particularly within the context of the difficult pre-COVID context. So let's bring our minds back to February, March 2021, when the reality of the pandemic, or 2020 I should say, when the reality of the pandemic was starting to take effect. As COVID-19 spread through the world as a highly infectious disease, it also generated widespread anxiety, fear and trauma. Both the virus and the subsequent management of the pandemic, including social isolation and physical distancing, distressing symptoms, hospitalization, and for some death, created a powerful trauma ripple effect. People experienced widespread disruption to their normal lives. And those at the acute end included frontline emergency and key workers in health and social care. The pandemic has placed a huge pressure on the ability of the NHS to deliver safe, high-quality care. And for our staff, the pandemic has had a significant physical, mental, and psychological impact, and this will continue for some time. As the pandemic is a real threat to lives, concern, fear, and stress are natural reactions. However, our staff's vulnerability to experiencing psychological distress or trauma have been increased by a number of things, including the threat response being activated even further when having to put yourself in situations that increase the likelihood of contamination. Working in an extraordinarily busy and fast-paced, quickly changing environment. The increased burden of dealing with distressed families. Not being able to always work within your moral code. The increased need to support colleagues. The threat to self versus contaminating others. Separation from loved ones. Redeployment. Usual boundaries may become blurred. Difficult switching off. And neglecting self-care. And 2 recent studies by De Kock and colleagues and also Greenberg and colleagues both highlight the significant impact of mental health on frontline staff. And in particular, it's interesting, it's highlighting nurses being a particular risk. So studies are starting to come out to kind of back this up. So how do NHS leaders, teams and individuals recover from the trauma of COVID-19? Okay. So all of the factors discussed so far make the trauma of the pandemic harder to deal with than many other major incidents, disasters, mass casualties or bereavements. For this reason, a trauma-informed approach to well-being during and after the pandemic has been recommended. This is a practical, value-driven, system-wide approach to the impact of trauma. It appreciates people's responses in the environmental context in which they arise. It seeks to promote physical and psychological safety. It considers potential inadvertent harms from the actions intended to be helpful. It sets up relationships that empower and value people. So as I mentioned earlier, when thinking about the what to do, it is important to first consider and better understand the problem we are trying to address. To understand the why of the what. And to do this, we need to understand how we as humans function, particularly under times of stress. If we are better able to understand the mechanisms of human behaviour and emotional distress, then the tools for recovery are more likely to be understandable, acceptable, sustainable and effective. So as such, I'm going to spend a little bit of time introducing you to the 3 circles model of emotional regulation. It's beyond the scope of today's presentation to discuss trauma-informed care and compassionate leadership, both of which are a crucial part of managing and recovering from the pandemic. But instead, I wanted to just really highlight how they fit within this framework. So the 3 circles model of emotional regulation is a core tenet of compassion-focused therapy, which was developed by Professor Paul Gilbert. So compassion-focused therapy is rooted in an evolutionary understanding of the development of the mind, some neuroscience, neurophysiological and attachment research, which helps us understand the nature of our 3 most basic emotional regulation systems. So neuroscience suggests that we have 3 emotional systems which work best of all when they are in balance. We can represent these with 3 circles. So the threat system is the red circle, the drive system is the blue circle, and the soothing system is the green circle. So the first one is threat. So this is like our brain's alarm system that alerts us when we are in danger. So when you feel a surge of fear when you see a bus bearing down on you on the road, or if you feel angry if someone has treated you unfairly, or you feel disgust when you notice that the apple you're about to bite in is rotten, that's your threat system working. It operates on a better safe than sorry principle. So from your threat system's perspective, it's doing its job correctly if it alerts you to danger 10 times, but only on 1 occasion it was a real threat. When we think about the world our ancestors evolved in, the ones who hesitated just a moment to see if that lion really was going to eat them probably wouldn't have made it. Another important thing to know about our threat system is that because we are a social species, living in a group, being accepted by others is crucial to our survival. Think back again to our ancestors living in the savannah. Being cast out by the group would have been a direct threat to that individual's survival. So our threat system are also on alert for any signs that we might be rejected or otherwise shunned from our social group. So the threat system is associated with body chemicals like adrenaline and cortisol or stress hormones. And the natural response is the natural response to the threat system triggers our instincts to fight, flight, or freeze. The next system to think about is our drive system. So this is our get up and go pleasure-based system that gives us the sense of reward and excitement when we do something fun or achieve an important goal. So often people's drive system is activated by things like enjoying work, doing sports, engaging in hobbies, going to the theatre or cinema. So our drive system is associated with dopamine, our brain signal for reward. The final system is the soothe system. So this is a pleasure-based system, but is more focused on a feeling of slowing down, contentment, feeling safe, and social connectedness. This system is highly associated with being around others we love and trust. And also anything that helps our mind slow down, such as yoga, physical touch like hugs or massages, taking a bath, meditation, and being around pets. The soothe system is associated with oxytocin, which is a hormone of positive feelings like love and bonding. It is also associated with being better able to problem solve and make decisions. Now, you might have guessed that the threat system is very good at being activated all by itself and quite happily alert us to any possible threats that may or may not actually harm us. The drive and soothe systems, however, need to be tended and nurtured a bit like a garden. We have to put some effort into their upkeep. And the 3 systems work best overall when they are balanced. And this is because the 2 pleasure systems, especially soothe, can work to calm down the feelings of threat. Physiologically, the soothe system acts like a brake on threat. So if you can imagine that the threat system is like a bike speeding down a hill, and the soothe system is the handbrake. So how does this relate to everything we've been going through now and over the past 18 months? Well, our threat system has been feeling surprisingly rather overactive for a very long time. There are lots of fears our threat system cannot easily resolve, and this has been going on for a long time, and much is out of our control, and we don't know what the future is going to look like. We've had to be careful around other people now, which is really unpleasant for our social species. And add to this, our usual ways of managing threat through drive and soothe have been severely restricted for much of the pandemic. Things we do for pleasure that are part of the drive system, like going to the gym, going out for dinner, or just being out at all, have been off limits for most of the time. We may not have had much time or the headspace for doing fun things, as we've been juggling working from home with children in it, or extra long shifts with increasingly overwhelming demands. Likewise, our easiest way of activating and soothe through physical proximity with others has been against the law for most of the pandemic. And it may feel silly to take time for yourself to do something calming like have a bath. So this leaves our systems in a rather dire situation. So what can we do about this? So how do we rebalance the system and in particular increase our feelings of safety? So on an individual level, we can acknowledge feelings of threat, but try not to let them run the show. They are real feelings and they are telling us something important. It is okay to feel upset, frightened, angry and tearful, but do try to notice where your threat mind is taking you to. So are you getting upset or caught in regrets about the past or worries about the future? This is probably less helpful to do. This is probably less helpful to what you may need to do in the present moment. One trick is to thank the threat system for its help. Thank you, threat mind, for pointing this out to me, but I'm now going to turn your volume down. And bring yourself back to the present moment using a grounding technique such as connecting with your senses. What are 3 things you could see? What are 3 things you could hear? What are 3 things you could touch right now? Notice how your body feels in this moment with your feet firmly on the floor, your back in an upright position. Remember that the soothe system acts as a brake on threat, and it's not just something lovely you have to do all the time. Although this might seem insignificant in the face of all the threats facing us right now, the power of the breath and regulating our systems is really incredible. The trick is to breathe in a rhythmic way, evenly and smoothly. Counting can be helpful. So for example, the famous box breathing, 1, 2, 3 on the in-breath, and 1, 2, 3 on the out-breath, holding each side for 4. Everyone has a different rhythm and rate, so pick one that feels right for you and experiment during a calm and quiet moment. Just figure out what works for you. 2 minutes of rhythmic breathing can do wonders for calming our body and brain and will allow you to think more clearly in that moment. What's important is to remember that while soothe regulates threat, it does not make threat go away. But it does allow you to get into the mindset where you can better make decisions and problem solve what you actually need to do in that moment to manage the threat. So how do we systematically grow safety? So you may not be able to see this very clearly, so you will be receiving the slides, but the Regional Workforces Wellbeing Network based in Northern Ireland, no connection to me, I saw this on Twitter, and they've developed this wonderful infographic as a guide for thinking about the COVID recovery journey. So I'll try and briefly go through it. So it breaks the journey down into the 8 phases, and the twists and turns, I think, illustrates that it's not necessarily a linear process. So briefly, the 8 phases are, number 1, we all responded to the crisis in various ways, so being redeployed, working from home, wearing PPE, etc. Consequently, we then experience various reactions, number 2, and the need is that it's important to acknowledge this. Number 3 is the need to pause and to consider what it is important to keep in mind as we move forward. Number 4 emphasizes the need for rest and recharge, and I would add to grow green, to grow safety, including taking the time to do nothing, nurturing care, experience joy, and connect with loved ones. And this is what a lot of the conference this week is about. Number 5 is the importance of reflection, both individually but together, taking the time to tell our stories, and team time, which Louise is going to talk about shortly, is a good example of this. Trying to make meaning of what has happened, mourn our losses, and celebrate our victories. Number 6 is the need to reconnect with our teams, especially those of us who have been redeployed into other teams, to rebuild and repair relationships, which is a big issue, isn't it? It's a big factor that has come in to the pandemic, and to understand each other's journeys. Importantly, we need to review, which is number 7, and share our learning, maintaining and embedding the new skills and ways of working, and acknowledge and accept that we could have done better. Apologise where needed, thank when needed, and appreciate ourselves and each other. And the last one is moving forward, there is a need to reimagine by retaining what worked well, restore what we missed, and reimagine what we wish for our future. Okay. So as I said earlier, it's beyond the scope of this presentation to go into any depth in trauma-informed care, but I really just wanted to position this in the context where it sits in the 3 circles model of emotional regulation, so growing the green. And similarly with compassionate leadership, we need to think about it, but again, it's beyond the scope of the presentation. But I'm sure lots of you have come across Michael West, who's been a huge influence in this area. His first publication, and probably every publication since, has been seminal. But very briefly, Michael and his colleagues have analysed a huge amount of data from the NHS, and this is pre-COVID, from the NHS staff survey, and found the staff experience of work, or how they're feeling at work, is highly correlated with outcomes for patient care, even mortality and patient safety. Furthermore, there was a link made between staff's views of their leaders and how patients view their care. So leadership is really important. Okay. And of particular importance is Michael's work on compassionate leadership. And now more than ever, it's crucial that we are embedding these approaches into our work as leaders in our organisation at this time of crisis and recovery. So I'm now just going to briefly talk and introduce you to the Staff Health and Wellbeing Service and really how NCIC has responded to the pandemic, provide an overview of the past year, where we're currently at, and our hopes for the future. And then I'll hand over to Louise, who will talk us through, introduce team time and talk us through our learning of that over the past year too. Again, this is all about growing the green. So our journey so far. So during the active phase of COVID-19, the Trust proactively supported staff working collaboratively with occupational health, physical health psychology is the only psychology service in the Trust, the patient experience team and library services comms as well, to develop a staff support network. They did this in various ways. So implementing a new and enhanced employee assistance program called VivUp, establishing a local staff network support line with matched care interventions, including one-to-one psychological therapy if needed, increased activity and visibility of occupational health services, targeted information and signposting support to staff through COVID-19 daily updates and dedicated resource sections in the Trust intranet. There's also increased post-serial support visible to acute inpatient teams, including meet and greet, to offer signposting and support. And then in February 2021, and this year, the ICS, Integrated Care System funding, was secured to ensure a more comprehensive and sustainable staff offer due to the predicted psychological impact of the pandemic on our frontline staff. So, there are various ways to think about this, as we think about the slide on what staff wellbeing was like pre-COVID. It took a pandemic really to get the funding, but at least we've got it. And, the next step is 1st of June 2021, when we officially launched. The aim is to provide a more substantive and sustainable offer that meets the needs of our staff, as across the whole of the organisation. The team is very teeny tiny, but very experienced, and includes myself as a clinical psychologist specialising in trauma and compassionate care, a senior clinical practitioner with expertise in leadership and organisational development, a wellbeing coordinator with vast experience of working with occupational health and expertise on leading on health and wellbeing campaigns, a counsellor with specialist knowledge and skills and vast experience in supporting staff in occupational health, and Ian, who you met earlier, a mindfulness practitioner who successfully integrated mindfulness training into the organisation over the past several years, which has benefited many staff both before the pandemic, but particularly during the pandemic as well. And this is just an example you may have seen for those of you who are in the Trust, that was kind of advertising the offer that was available for our staff. So we had online support, and it was really aimed at self-management, self-care. Then we had telephone support, because obviously during the acute phases we weren't able to see people face to face, so we had telephone, but we also had Zoom and attend anywhere sessions. And then it was just broadening the reach outside of what we could offer to the other organisations, including what the ICS Hub, Staff Wellbeing Hub, are able to offer too, which we continue to link in with. So this is all growing the green. So thinking about ourselves and the staff health and wellbeing service, really just need to raise the issue that usually strategies focus, particularly in acute phases, on the individual and are reactive in nature. So for example, a staff member is referred psychological support due to distress caused by bullying at work, for instance. So whilst this is an appropriate need, we also need to think more holistically. Again, Paul was talking about this in his presentation. That grassroots, taking a whole system approach that needs to be both proactive and reactive on an individual and organisational system level, with a particular emphasis on the proactive approaches. This is just some of the examples of the kind of stuff that we're offering, some of the things that we're offering on an individual level, we're actually doing, and some are hopefully going to be in the next few months. And as we start to expand and actually find out what the need in the particular areas we need to be in, we can do that. So an example of an individual reactive would be individual psychological therapy, some of the occupational health stuff. So people being referred due to illness or stress, and actually looking at how we can adapt working environments to support people. And some of the things that we're doing at the moment, maybe if there are some difficulties with staff, we might provide a consultation to the managers with the hope of providing more support and more of a trauma-informed approach potentially. Thinking about the more proactive stuff, there's the wellbeing groups that have been going throughout the pandemic, possibly before, and there are various things from sleep to healthy eating to menopause to stress and anxiety. And they're more kind of looking at how we can kind of improve our lives in the here and now and every day to kind of improve our well-being. Mindfulness training, which will be at every level, so we could have mindfulness as a reactive approach, but actually what Ian has managed to do very successfully is embed that within our culture. One of the things we're hoping to roll out as well is that compassionate mind training, which will build upon and educate our staff at all levels of the organisation in the 3 circles model, but also train people on how to be more compassionate. Not just towards, we know our staff are compassionate towards everybody, the other people, particularly our patients, but importantly for that to be sustainable, it needs to be for us, compassion towards ourselves, and also about receiving compassion, because that's something that our staff and generally as humans we find a bit more difficult. Okay. And the other one that we're keen to get off the ground is that coaching, mentoring, reflective space for our senior leaders and clinicians too. Because another thing that we've noticed is that those more senior in the organisation are great at referring and supporting staff, but not so good at receiving it themselves. And that's really, really important, as we know. Support the carers and the managers too. Apologies. And then thinking about working more at a more systemic level. So team time, or time I've put here, it's team time. It currently is a more reactive, so teams are requesting it based on, the teams struggling, they need to decompress, they need a space to talk about. But actually what we're hoping is that, moving forward, it actually becomes a proactive member that we start to embed it in the organisation, and people are routinely having these spaces to talk about the emotional impact of our work and our lives. We have TRIM, so the trauma risk management response, so that would be reactive, so something happens, there's a death or some kind of traumatic incident, and it's a bit like a first responder for psychological well-being. That has been well received, but there's work going to be done around that in a proactive sense about how you don't need a psychologist to do that. It doesn't need to be a psychological service. It's something about embedding that within the culture and within the teams and training and supporting our staff to do that themselves. with support from psychology if needed. And also some focused teamwork formulation and development. So if teams are in conflict or there are difficulties going on or something has happened, that we can go in and react to the problem and see can we work with the team to have a positive outcome. And then lastly, thinking about some of the proactive stuff. So creating safe and psychological, healthy working environments. So looking at psychological safety training. Schwartz rounds, which have been in the trust before but have been put on pause temporarily as due to the nature of the pandemic, making that quite difficult. Another thing that we're keen to get off the ground, so watch this space, is the taking care, giving care rounds, the compassionate circles, where we go in and we embed this kind of, it's like a 20-minute care space really, where we do an exercise with teams that they can then practice and take on as themselves and make part of what they do on a general basis really. We already have a really good physical wellbeing promotion program that's been running for a long time, but really promoting that and engaging people with that, and really just keeping the employee experience of work and the organizational agenda. Okay. So now I'm going to hand over to Louise. Are you wanting to take control, Louise? Okay, you're still on mute.
Thanks, Brenda. That's brilliant. Thank you. I'll take control and just upload my slides. Can you see that okay, Brenda, everybody? Are you on mute, Brenda? Or am I?
I'm on mute. Mine are still up, but I don't know how do I.
If you just click on the cross where you're sharing.
So I'll take control back, and there is a cross.
Well, so where you normally do the sharing.
There we go.
Stop presenting. Yeah. Lovely. Is that sharing? Is that okay? Lovely. Yep. Morning, all. So thank you, Brenda. That's really informative and helpful. And what we wanted to do was just to give you a bit of an example of some of the reactive work that we have been doing across the trust, and a very successful piece of work that Brenda, myself, our colleague Catherine Parker, and Elaine Crooks were involved in over the last 14 months. So team time, as Brenda's alluded to, comes out of the sort of foundation of Schwartz rounds. Some of you may well have attended some of the Schwartz rounds. So what I'm going to do is introduce you a little bit to Schwartz rounds, show you a bit of a video of what a Schwartz round might look like, and then go on to team time and how that was adapted in response to COVID-19 crisis. And I'll show you I'll play you a video on one of the stories, just to give you an idea of what we might talk about. So Schwartz rounds was founded by Ken Schwartz. He was a health attorney in Boston and was diagnosed with terminal lung cancer. And he found that actually acts of kindness from health professionals was the biggest part of his care that he received. And his words were kind of, these acts of kindness have made the unbearable bearable. But he also recognized the emotional impact that working in healthcare, and particularly in palliative care, had on staff. And his legacy was, before he died, was to set up the Schwartz Center in Boston. And Schwartz rounds have then become quite an innate part of healthcare system, and we've got a number of them that are within a number of trusts within the UK who run Schwartz rounds. So the purpose of Schwartz rounds really is it's across the organisation. So it's open to clinical and non-clinical staff. And the importance of a Schwartz round is to allow the opportunity for staff to reduce stress, to feel less isolated within their professions, have a better understanding of other people's roles, and also to minimise the impact of hierarchies across healthcare systems. And the importance of and the focus for Schwartz Rounds is that it's a reflective space for health professionals to talk about their experiences of working in healthcare and the emotional impact of working within health themselves. The point to Schwartz Rounds is not around problem solving, and it's not around blaming of individuals or services or systems. It's just an opportunity to share their emotional impact with other colleagues. And with Schwartz Rounds, it's more around past events. So it might have been something that's happened 5-6 years ago. For example, we tend to use different titles and stories for our Schwartz Round. So it could be, our last one was around difference. Before the COVID situation, we ran around on difference, and that might be in anything from religious views to gender to cultural differences. So it's an opportunity for reflection of these past events. So I'm going to show you, so I'm just need to come out of the presentation. I'm going to show you an example of how Schwartz Rounds used to be run. I'm just going to show you the first two minutes of the Schwartz Round, and I didn't want to share the stories from the panel because that might elicit some distress for people, but I will show you the final part of the session where people are using reflection. So I'll just point. Can you see the slide, Brenda? Is that, no, that's not coming up, is it?
Not yet, Lou.
Right, so bear with me. Let's just share that.
Yes, can see it now.
Okay.
Can't hear anything, Lou.
Oh.
Might have to share your.
No, you know why? It's because I've got my headphones on.
Okay.
Right.
Can't really hear it, Lou, I'm afraid. Let's just.
Apologies, bear with me.
If anybody in the audience knows how to solve this, please do shout up.
Is that, could you not hear that?
Well, for me personally, it's not really, no. It's a bit of
You might need to stop sharing, put your volume to your speakers, and then share it again.
Sorry.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's worked in the past. It's worth a try, isn't it?
Thank you. Thank you. The mercy of technology.
Hi, Brenda. I think Louise has just dipped out. We've just seen her pop up in the main lobby, so we're just trying to reassign her now.
Thank you, Chelsea.
No problem.
You're a mute, Louise.
Oh, this is right.
You disappeared.
Right, apologise. And can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, so let's try.
So you're sharing your screen at the minute. We can see your teams.
Is that okay?
We can see your team time MS Teams thing. You can
That's not coming on, is it?
see it now. You can see the YouTube clip. It's not going to work, Lou. Just like white noise, so I don't know.
Right, I'm just going to try my iPad on the iPad.
Sorry, I just googled something if you want to try this. I think this might work. If you go on the share content button, where you pick to share your screen, there's a button at the top that says include computer sound. And if you make sure that's clicked on, I think that works.
Thank you.
So go on.
The arrow, the share button.
Yeah.
So you click on the share button, which is the arrow in the box. And the share content to the right, if you click that wee box, it says
Right. Let me know how you.
Well, welcome to today's Schwartz Round. For those of you who don't know me or who here for the first time in particular, welcome. My name is Peter Wilkinson. I'm the clinical lead for the Schwartz Rounds. Delighted to welcome the panelists here today to tell their stories. This is our fourth year, if you like, of Schwartz Rounds. We've been running them for 4 years. And I'd just like to thank all the people over that time who've told their stories, and also the people who've been in the audience as well to share those stories. They've been very powerful stories at times, very emotional, but I think they've told all of us about the pressures about working in healthcare, but also the importance of sharing stories and sharing emotions with people, because if we don't do that and bottle it up, it's not good for us, is it? And it's not good for our patients. So the usual Schwartz Rounds rules, if I can put them as strongly as that. The conversation today is confidential, as you're aware. The themes you can discuss outside the room, but not the people. So on to the stories, and I'm just going to ask the panelists to introduce themselves, and then we'll go on to the stories.
Great. Any other reflections on that situation?
I just wanted to reflect on some of the comments Paul made with regard to the use of the word failure. And sometimes we use failure versus unsuccessful. And failure can have the connotation that perhaps you haven't tried hard enough. And it may not necessarily convey that you can put in all the effort, put in all your experience, use a lot of teamwork, use the right words, but still not arrive at a successful outcome. And that can be difficult to deal with, but is not in itself necessarily a failure.
It's just really a comment. I also work with the neonatal team about, and you asked about questioning expertise. I'd almost challenge that, because I think we encourage our families to ask us questions, and I would actually encourage them to ask us questions and to challenge things. And I think our role is to be able to answer those questions.
I've been pondering whether to share something, and I think I will, because the two words that come up that resonate with me most is the failure and the rejection. And having been, I'm a clinician myself, but having been on the other side of this as a parent 20 years ago of a very, very sick child, and it's still quite hard to talk about. So the two feelings that I had most through my entire time of a very effective, very competent clinical team who kept me updated, who communicated, who gave me the plans, who talked to me, who engaged with me, the two things that I felt the whole way were failure and rejection. And that's as a parent. So the rejection of you is not because we won't engage with the spiritual bit. For me, it was the failure as a parent. And I couldn't, it meant the end of the road. And I couldn't do that.
Thank you, Sue. Thank you. Any last reflections from the audience? I think the thing that I've taken away from this is that having good relationships with the people that we care for and their families is massively important. And it's when those break down that it's harder. But also what we go through sometimes when we're caring for somebody who's so sick and you perhaps know that they're going to die, and the emotions that you have if you don't think the right thing's being done is hard to deal with. And it's really important that we do share these emotions, because we know from research that keeping this kind of stuff bottled inside will eventually will burn out, and that's
Okay, so just bring up this slide. So that was an example of Schwartz rounds. So that's where the team time has come about as a result of COVID. So the structure around how we deliver our team times is very similar. We have two storytellers who are on our panel who share stories about COVID, and the title we've used over the last 12 months has been COVID and Me. And we've asked two storytellers to share the emotional impact a particular situation during this time has happened. So the difference between Schwartz rounds, as I said before, Schwartz is around across the organisation, so that's for anybody. Team time is actually purely just for teams, because of confidentiality, of being able to offer people support during really challenging times when staff may well have been redeployed, have gone through difficult times, have had to take on different work, and also we wanted it was going to be online as well. So a lot of our team times have been an online version, not face to face, although we have run face to face sessions as well. So team time is a reactive response to COVID and the current pandemic.
Louise, sound is gone really funny.
Okay.
I don't know if you want to plug yourself back in or.
Okay. Sorry. I apologise. I'm just going to show you some. A bit better.
A little bit, yeah.
I'm just going to show you an example of a team time video of a
team member who's sharing the emotional impact the COVID situation had on them, and the setup for the team time session is very similar to Schwartz, because I'm just conscious of time as well.
So I'll just change the sound again.
A sister in a trust in Devon, and I have been working within my team for about 3 years now. At the beginning of the COVID outbreak, we had some difficult times. I work on a trauma ward, and unfortunately, the trust felt that trauma wasn't really going to be that necessary because people are staying in. So we've broken down our team and separated, and that was really quite tough. So trying to lead through dispersing our team off to various different wards, people being redeployed, some people being unable to work in red areas or amber areas for COVID patients due to their own health issues or just other things, pregnancies, etc., was really difficult because everybody felt that loss immediately. I was really surprised. I mean, the day that we shut our ward was harrowing. I've never felt so sad as a nurse, just because we'd worked so hard to build up a really good environment for our patients, and it was really sad. It was a really sad day, and you just felt as we were closing down the ward and people were coming together, and they worked so hard, and I was so proud. That it was really, really the end of something, even though we were told it's temporary. It was like the end of an era, and there was some.
Okay, Can you hear me okay now, Brenda?
I stopped that. I didn't go through that all in detail just because I'm conscious of time and allowing up people the opportunity to ask some questions before the end. So that was an example of maybe a staff member who has wanted to. It's not showing full there. Wanted to share their story with the emotional impact that actually COVID had on them and their wards, and she went on later to talk very much about the impact when she actually got COVID herself and family members. So that's an example of what one of the storytellers might share. So over the past 14 months or so, we've had at least 30 referrals, and that's really just been by word of mouth. So from one or two people have asked us about team time, or we've approached teams, and then moving forwards, we ended up with over 30 referrals, and we're going to have a more formalized system around that through Brenda's service, who's very kindly hosting Schwartz and team time in the staff wellbeing service. So we've run around 18 team times in total with 2 follow-up sessions, and that's been across the north, east, west and south. Now, we started off with 4 facilitators. That's Brenda, Catherine, Elaine Crooks and myself. And we're absolutely delighted that the trust have funded 18 places to fund Schwartz trained facilitators. So we've had 13 who have just gone through the training themselves in Schwartz and team time, and we'll have a further 5 to go through training after that. So we're absolutely over the moon that the trust have invested that time in staff, and that's with health professionals from allied health professionals, senior managers, doctors, medics. Be lovely to have some non-clinic staff as facilitators too. So what the key themes that came out of that, going back to Brenda's sort of 3-system model, what we were seeing is staff under threat, expressing a lot of anger, fear of catching COVID, taking it home, that sense of isolation that they were feeling, particularly if you're remote working, a lot of guilt, anxiety, particularly around redeployment, physical, emotional exhaustion, a lot of moral injury as well, decisions that they had to make around who to sit with patients when they were sadly dying, when family members couldn't attend. Staff also struggling with a lot of trauma, post-traumatic stress, and generally feeling absolutely overwhelmed. So these were the key themes that we were seeing over the last 14 months. But actually what staff on their feedback were finding with the team time sessions, it actually allowed them an opportunity for that connectedness with their colleagues, with teams, to reduce that sense of isolation, actually a normalization of their feelings, so that some of them were feeling that I'm struggling, I'm not sure I'm able to cope with this, but actually not feeling alone with how they were feeling. They were getting a sense of compassion from colleagues and within the teams, a lot of kindness that was being shared and felt well supported, and actually just a relief that they weren't feeling what they were feeling and it wasn't just about them. So actually, this team time session, as Brenda has mentioned, we're hoping that's going to be more of a proactive approach longer term, and also going back to Schwartz rounds and team times moving forwards in order to grow the green and within teams themselves. So that was a little whistle-stop tour of some of our Schwartz and team time, which is just one intervention that, as a team, we've been providing staff over that time. So I'm conscious we've only got 3 minutes before the breaks. I know you've only got 5 minutes, quick break time before the main session again. So has anybody got any questions, thoughts, reflections that you'd like to share with Brenda and I? And I'll take this off the screen. If you just put something in the chat, or
Morgan, if you want to raise your hand, go ahead.
Hi, thank you both. That was a very interesting reflection of probably the journey a lot of us been on. I'm just interested about how you are planning to continue the delivery of this in a sort of a sustainable way, but also aligning it with the occupational health and wellbeing functions, so that instead of them becoming parallel offerings, they actually converge and become part of a whole holistic staff health and wellbeing offering. Because clearly, if we don't start to focus on the proactive work, even around the more physiological issues that then create a lot of our staff absence around MSK. In addition to the mental health, clearly there is an opportunity to build on that, because actually being able to manage your physiological issues with a stronger mental health approach is really beneficial. So just from a future perspective, have you got that in your sights? Do you have plans for that? Or is it still at the moment a triaging, a referral system rather than a collaboration between the two? Just that's a bit I wasn't clear on.
Yeah, I think it's happening as we speak. I think it's one of these things where it came off the back of the pandemic that there was a need for something local and something very specialist and focused on, supporting our frontline staff. And I think from that money has now come. We've been able to offer a more substantive offer, and actually a more permanent offer, hopefully. And I think part of that is about looking at how do we work alongside our colleagues in occupational health, and the bigger issue is so that moving forward that we're complementing each other, as you say, and that we were able to offer a more holistic approach. So that's happening at the moment. So I can't comment on that because it's a process that's happening, but it's really encouraging and exciting to be able to free up occupational health and allow us, I guess, to focus on how we do this together, because I do think, not only the fallout of the pandemic, but it's also that pre-stuff as well, in terms of how we are going to help our staff in every way possible, really, and put them at the centre of how we support them. So that's all I can say about that at the moment. Is that okay, Morven?
No, that's fine.
Yeah,
Thank you, Brenda.
yeah.
Thanks,
Thank
Louise.
you.
Thank you. I'm conscious of time. It's 11:30 and not wanting. If anybody has any other questions or anything, you could probably put them in the chat, and whether they get picked up, that's absolutely fine, and we can have a look at that. But hopefully we'll get to meet you all again at some point. Yeah. Thank you, Brenda. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Enjoy the rest of the conference.